You guys have been absolutely flooding my comments asking for more retail horror stories, and let me tell you, I've been digging through submissions for weeks trying to find the most bone-chilling ones. Today I'm bringing you three absolutely terrifying true stories that all took place in shopping malls. These aren't your typical lost in the parking garage stories. These are genuine nightmare fuel that will make you think twice about staying late at the mall or wandering into those dimly lit corridors. Before we dive into these stories, I need to warn you that what you're about to hear involves some seriously disturbing encounters. We're talking about people who probably shouldn't be walking free, situations that could have ended much worse, and moments where split-second decisions meant the difference between making it home safely or becoming a missing person case. If you're easily spooked or you're planning a mall trip anytime soon, you might want to save this video for later. Now, what makes these stories particularly chilling is that they all happened in places we consider safe. Shopping malls are supposed to be public spaces with security, cameras, and plenty of people around. But as you'll discover, sometimes the very things that make us feel secure can work against us. The crowds that should protect us can also help predators blend in. The maze-like layout that makes shopping convenient can become a trap when you need to escape. And those security cameras, well, they're only useful if someone's actually watching them. I've personally verified these stories with the people who lived through them, and I can tell you that the fear in their voices when they recounted these experiences was absolutely real. These aren't urban legends or creepypasta. These are real people who found themselves in situations that most of us pray we'll never face. The first story comes from Sarah, who was 19 at the time this happened. She was working at a clothing store in a mid-sized mall in Ohio. It was a typical Tuesday evening in late October, and the mall was pretty dead. You know how it is on weeknights. Mostly just employees getting ready to close up and the occasional straggler finishing up their shopping. Sarah was working the closing shift with her manager, but her manager had stepped out to grab dinner from the food court, leaving Sarah alone in the store. The mall was supposed to close at 9, and it was already 8:30. Sarah was doing her usual closing routine, folding clothes and straightening up the displays when she noticed someone standing outside the store entrance. At first, she didn't think much of it. Customers sometimes linger outside stores, checking their phones or waiting for friends. But when she looked up again a few minutes later, the man was still there, just standing completely still and staring directly at her. Sarah described him as being in his 40s, wearing a dirty baseball cap and a jacket that looked like it hadn't been washed in months. What really unsettled her was his expression. He wasn't looking around or checking his phone like a normal person would. He was just locked onto her with this intense, unblinking stare. Sarah tried to ignore him and continued with her closing tasks. But every time she glanced toward the entrance, he was still there. Same position, same stare. It had been at least 10 minutes now, and he hadn't moved an inch. She started to feel genuinely uncomfortable and decided to call her manager. But when she reached for her phone, she realized she'd left it in the back room. She walked toward the rear of the store to get her phone, and when she came back, the man was gone. Sarah felt a wave of relief wash over her. maybe he'd just been waiting for someone and had finally moved on. She went back to folding clothes, trying to shake off the creepy feeling the whole encounter had given her. That's when she heard the sound of hangers scraping against the metal clothing racks. Sarah froze. The sound was coming from the back corner of the store near the dressing rooms. She called out, "We're closing in a few minutes," thinking maybe a customer had slipped in while she was getting her phone. But nobody responded. Sarah grabbed a security phone from behind the counter and slowly walked toward the back of the store. The lights in that section were dimmer, and the shadows from the clothing racks created this maze-like effect that made it hard to see clearly. She called out again, "Hello? Is someone back there?" Still nothing. As she got closer to the dressing room, Sarah noticed that one of the doors was slightly ajar. She was positive she'd checked all the rooms earlier and locked them. Store policy required all dressing rooms to be secured before closing. Her heart started pounding as she realized someone had to be in there. Sarah stood about 10 feet from the dressing room door, trying to decide what to do. She could call mall security, but they'd probably just tell her to check it out herself first. She could wait for her manager to come back, but that could be another 20 minutes. The smart thing would have been to just leave the store entirely. But Sarah was young and didn't want to seem paranoid or cause a scene over nothing. She took a deep breath and pushed the dressing room door open. The small space was empty, but Sarah immediately noticed something that made her blood run cold. On the floor of the dressing room were muddy footprints that definitely hadn't been there before. The prints were large, clearly from a man's boot, and they were still wet. Sarah backed away from the dressing room, her hands shaking as she fumbled with the security phone. But before she could dial, she heard another sound that made her stomach drop. The metal security gate at the front of the store was being pulled down. Someone was closing the store from the outside. She ran toward the front entrance, but by the time she got there, the gate was already halfway down. Through the gaps in the metal, she could see the man from earlier. He was standing right outside, and he had somehow gotten hold of the gate key. Sarah dropped to her knees and tried to crawl under the gate, but it was too late. The man grabbed the bottom of the gate and slammed it shut with a loud crash that echoed through the empty mall. Sarah was trapped inside her own store with no way out. The man was on the other side of the gate, and she could see him clearly now. He was smiling, but it wasn't a normal smile. It was the kind of smile that made every instinct in her body scream that she was in serious danger. The man pulled out a set of keys and started trying different ones on the gate lock. Sarah realized he must have somehow gotten them from maintenance or security. She ran to the back of the store and tried the employee exit, but it was locked and required a key she didn't have. She was completely trapped. That's when she heard the gate starting to rattle open again. The man had found the right key. Sarah grabbed the security phone and dialed mall security, but the line just rang and rang. She tried calling 911, but the call wouldn't go through. The mall's cell reception had always been terrible, and the landline seemed to be dead. Sarah could hear footsteps entering the store. They were slow and deliberate, like the man was taking his time because he knew she had nowhere to go. She hid behind a circular clothing rack near the back of the store, trying to control her breathing and stay as quiet as possible. The footsteps stopped somewhere near the middle of the store. Then she heard the man's voice for the first time. He spoke in a calm, almost sing-song tone that was somehow more terrifying than if he'd been shouting. He said, "I know you're back there, Sarah. I've been watching you for weeks." The fact that he knew her name made Sarah's blood turn to ice. She'd never seen this man before in her life, but he'd been watching her for weeks. She pressed herself deeper behind the clothing rack, trying to become invisible as the footsteps started moving again. "I know you're scared," the man continued in that same eerily calm voice. "But I'm not going to hurt you. I just want to talk. I've been trying to work up the courage to approach you for so long." Sarah bit down on her knuckle to keep from making any noise. Through the gaps in the clothing, she could see his legs as he walked slowly between the racks, methodically checking each hiding spot. He was getting closer. "I come to the mall every Tuesday and Thursday," he said. "I sit in the food court and watch you work. You're so beautiful when you're concentrating. The way you fold those clothes so carefully, the way you smile at customers even when they're rude to you." Sarah's manager chose that exact moment to return from dinner. She heard him calling out, "Sarah? Why is the gate down, Sarah? Are you in there?" The man's footsteps stopped immediately. Sarah took her chance and screamed as loud as she could, "Help me! There's someone in here. Call security." She heard her manager frantically trying to get the gate open while shouting for mall security. The man cursed and started running toward the back of the store. Within minutes, security arrived and got the gate open. But by then, the man had somehow disappeared. They searched the entire store, including the storage room and employee areas, but found no trace of him. The only evidence he'd been there were those muddy footprints in the dressing room and the fact that he'd had keys to the security gate. The police were called and they reviewed the mall's security footage. They found clear images of the man, but he was never identified or caught. Sarah quit her job the next day and never went back to that mall. She still has nightmares about that voice calling her name in the dark. The second story takes place in a much larger shopping center in Nevada. This one comes from Marcus, who was 16 at the time. He and his friends had made plans to meet at the mall on a Saturday afternoon. But due to some miscommunication, Marcus ended up arriving about an hour before everyone else. Not wanting to just stand around waiting, Marcus decided to explore some of the stores he'd never been to before. The mall was huge, with multiple levels and several wings that branched off from the main corridors. Marcus wandered into one of the less popular sections, where there were mostly specialty stores and services that didn't get much foot traffic. He was walking past a store that sold phone accessories when he noticed someone following him. It was a middle-aged woman in a long brown coat, and she'd been about 20 feet behind him for the past few minutes. At first, Marcus thought it was just a coincidence, but when he stopped to look in a store window, she stopped too. When he walked faster, she walked faster. Marcus decided to test whether she was actually following him. He took a deliberately confusing route, going up and down escalators, doubling back on himself, and even ducking into a store and immediately coming back out. The woman matched his every move, always maintaining that same distance behind him. Starting to feel genuinely creeped out, Marcus headed toward the main part of the mall where there would be more people and security. But as he walked, he noticed the woman was slowly closing the distance between them. She was walking faster now, and Marcus could hear her footsteps echoing his own. When Marcus reached the main corridor, he looked back and saw that the woman was now only about 10 feet behind him. What he saw made his stomach drop. She was holding something in her hand, partially concealed by her coat. It looked like a syringe. Marcus broke into a run, pushing through the crowds of shoppers as the woman gave chase. He could hear her behind him, no longer trying to be subtle. People were staring and getting out of the way as this bizarre chase scene unfolded in broad daylight in the middle of a busy mall. Marcus ran toward the security office, which he knew was near the customer service desk. But when he got there, the office was empty. A sign on the door said the security guard was doing his rounds and would be back in 15 minutes. Marcus looked back and saw the woman had stopped about 50 feet away. She was just standing there watching him, still holding whatever was in her hand. Marcus ran into the nearest store, which happened to be a large department store. He told the employees what was happening, but they seemed skeptical. A teenage boy claiming he was being chased by a woman with a syringe probably sounded pretty far-fetched. They agreed to call security, but said it would take a few minutes. While they were making the call, Marcus kept watch at the store entrance. The woman was still out there pacing back and forth in front of the store like she was waiting for him to come out. After about 10 minutes, mall security finally arrived. When the security guard approached the woman, she immediately became agitated and started backing away. That's when Marcus and the guard both got a clear look at what she was holding. It was definitely a syringe, and it was filled with some kind of clear liquid. The woman started shouting about how Marcus was her son and she was trying to give him his medication. She claimed he was mentally ill and had run away from home. The security guard seemed confused and asked Marcus if he knew this woman. Marcus swore he'd never seen her before in his life. The situation escalated when the woman suddenly lunged toward Marcus with the syringe. The security guard tackled her, and during the struggle, the syringe fell to the floor and shattered. The woman was eventually restrained and police were called. It turned out the woman had no identification on her and refused to give her real name. The liquid in the syringe was sent for testing, and it came back as a powerful sedative that could have knocked Marcus unconscious within minutes. The woman was arrested, but she was later released on bail and never showed up for her court date. Her real identity was never discovered. Marcus still wonders what would have happened if she'd managed to inject him with that sedative. Would he have been found unconscious in the mall? Would he have been found at all? The third and final story is perhaps the most disturbing of all. It comes from Jennifer, who was 25 and working as a mall security guard in Arizona. This happened during her night shift, long after the mall had closed to the public. Jennifer was doing her routine patrol around midnight when she noticed that one of the stores had its lights on. This wasn't unusual. Sometimes employees worked late doing inventory or setting up new displays. But when she checked her schedule, there weren't supposed to be any late workers that night. She walked over to investigate and saw that it was a jewelry store. Through the window, she could see someone moving around inside. Jennifer knocked on the door and called out, identifying herself as security. The person inside immediately turned off the lights and stopped moving. Jennifer knew something was wrong. She radioed for backup and tried to contact the store manager, but couldn't reach anyone. She decided to use her master key to enter the store and check it out. The moment she opened the door, Jennifer knew she'd made a terrible mistake. The store had been completely ransacked. Display cases were smashed, jewelry was scattered everywhere, and the safe in the back room was wide open. But what made her blood run cold was the realization that whoever had done this was still inside the store with her. Jennifer reached for her radio to call for immediate police backup, but before she could key the microphone, someone grabbed her from behind. A man's voice whispered in her ear, "Drop the radio or I'll cut your throat." Jennifer felt something sharp pressed against her neck and realized this wasn't just a robbery gone wrong. This was a person who was willing to kill to avoid getting caught. She dropped her radio and raised her hands, trying to stay calm and figure out a way to escape. The man forced her to walk toward the back of the store, where Jennifer could see he'd set up what looked like a makeshift campsite. There was a sleeping bag, several days' worth of food, and a collection of tools that made her realize this person had been living in the mall for days, maybe weeks. "You just couldn't leave well enough alone, could you?" the man said. "I had a good thing going here. Nobody bothered me. I had everything I needed, and I was making a nice profit selling the jewelry I took." Jennifer realized that this man had been systematically robbing the mall from the inside, probably hitting a different store each night, and then hiding somewhere during the day when the mall was open. The fact that he'd been doing this for weeks without being caught meant he knew the security schedules and blind spots better than she did. The man tied Jennifer's hands with zip ties and made her sit on the floor while he gathered up the jewelry he'd stolen. He kept talking to her in a casual, almost friendly way that was more terrifying than if he'd been angry or threatening. "I'm going to have to kill you now," he said matter-of-factly. "I can't let you identify me, but I want you to know it's nothing personal. You seem like a nice person." That's when Jennifer remembered the panic button on her belt. It was designed to be pressed discreetly in emergency situations and would immediately alert police without making any noise. She managed to activate it without the man noticing. What saved Jennifer's life was that she'd activated the panic button just as another security guard was starting his shift. When he saw the alert, he immediately called police and came to investigate. The man heard footsteps approaching and panicked, leaving Jennifer tied up while he tried to escape through a service corridor. He was caught by police in the parking lot, and it turned out he was a former mall employee who'd been fired 6 months earlier. He'd been using his knowledge of the building's layout to hide during the day and commit thefts at night. Jennifer had stumbled onto what would have been his final robbery before disappearing with thousands of dollars worth of stolen merchandise. These 3 stories all have one thing in common. They show us that the places we think are safe can become dangerous in an instant. Whether it's a store closing time, a crowded afternoon, or even a secured building with professional security, Predators and criminals are always looking for opportunities. The people in these stories survived because they trusted their instincts, stayed alert, and fought back when they had to. Sarah's manager came back at exactly the right moment. Marcus ran toward help instead of trying to handle the situation alone. Jennifer remembered her emergency training and used the tools available to her. The next time you're at a mall, remember these stories. Trust your gut if something feels wrong. Stay aware of your surroundings. And never hesitate to call for help if you feel threatened. Because sometimes the difference between a close call and a tragedy is just a split-second decision. Thanks for watching, and remember, stay safe out there.